to be discussed. Thank you, Doris. We're really excited to be discussing on this topic. How do we enhance the urban lives of individuals and communities through design? Before we move on to the panel discussion, just a few house rules. If you can, please have your camera on so we can see your face. Please keep your mic muted at all time until Q&A if you want to talk or ask a question. You can send your questions in the Q&A section throughout the presentation or the moderated discussion. And then if you have any comments or you want to just interact a bit with the rest of the audience, you can use the chat feature. Another thing, if you need captions to be turned on, if you look at the bottom part of the screen, there's more with 3 dots. And then if you click on that, there's caption. You can turn that on if you need it. Yeah, and this call will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, Instagram as well. Let's keep this space nice and respectful. And so we invited 4 panelists today, but unfortunately one of the presenter is not able to join us due to unforeseen circumstances. But then that's okay, we'll have more time for Q&A. So the first panelist we got here is Dr. Terry Peters. She is a Canadian architect and a researcher based in Toronto at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson University. She is an assistant professor there. She's also a registered architect in the UK, holds a PhD in sustainable housing in Aarhus Architecture School in Denmark. Her research explores the social and human dimensions of green architecture. Her work on super architecture prioritize elements like wide open views, good airflow, and access to outdoor for improved health. She advocates for these principles in Canada and emphasizing on the importance of both of our natural environment and our overall well-being in architectural design. So Terry, could you get started with your presentation?
Great, thank you very much. I'll share my screen here. And hopefully, are you able to see that? Okay. Yes, okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to come and talk about my absolute favorite topic, healthy and sustainable environments. I'm going to talk mostly about biophilia and biophilic design and how we can incorporate nature spaces in different scales in our environment and why we might choose to do so. So I'm going to talk about just at the beginning, a couple of definitions: biophilia, salutogenic design, how this might connect to this concept that I've called super architecture, which is using the same health promoting design strategies that can also serve our natural environment. So instead of thinking about sustainable design and healthy design as 2 separate things, actually a lot of these strategies really work together very nicely. So in the context of climate action and how creating healthy, nurturing spaces for us in our built environment might impact our natural environment, here in Canada, we're really trying to come up with creative and resilient design solutions for the climate crisis, trying to think about how to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. In Ontario, we have climate change strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that we could think about health promoting and high quality spaces while we think about climate action and how we think about how these work together. So I just wanted to talk about that at the very beginning because nature-based solutions for climate adaptation can be really powerful. Salutogenic design, a term you might be familiar with, just thinking about health promoting. How can spaces help us feel like ourselves? Help us feel safe, help us feel healthy, So it's a term, salutogenesis is a term from sociology that means health origins. I've written quite a bit about this idea and how it translates into architecture. But basically, for the purpose of this short presentation, it's designs that make people healthier and happier. And biophilic design is this concept that people are naturally attracted to other forms of life. We all probably know that about ourselves. We like natural experiences, we like nature, we like other people. So people have this innate need to be around other forms of life. And biophilic design is linked to improved mood and reduced stress. There is some good research of how biophilic design can be applied in different building types and how people respond to it. My own work, I've been looking at learning environments and biophilic design. And also I have a current project on nursing homes, design for the aged and biophilic design. So sometimes when I talk to colleagues about biophilic design, they say, it's plants. It's outdoor spaces like this, and it's plants. It's putting plants in the offices. And it's really not. I think there's a lot we can engage with biophilia, this concept that goes beyond just the kind of image you might have in your mind when I say biophilia, like the garden courtyards of Alhambra in Spain or papyrus ponds. So I'm going to spend about 5 minutes and talk about some examples in just a minute. But it's worth saying that biophilic design is now being measured in different building rating systems. So in the last decade, we've really changed how we think about biophilic design. And I believe there's been a shift from performance of buildings, green buildings, sustainable buildings, energy performing, kind of ways of quantifying building performance towards people and our health and well-being in buildings. So you can see that reflected in things like the WELL standard, where they actually have a qualitative and a quantitative evaluation point for biophilia in buildings. So there's a document that I really enjoy by researchers Brownie, Clansing, and Ryan called 14 Patterns of Biophilic Design. It's a great document really aimed at designers, and it talks about how we might use biophilic design principles, but breaks it down into 14 patterns. So that's what I'm going to spend my time on, is some graphic examples and hopefully points of inspiration about how to take this topic of biophilic design and think about how we might use it in urban spaces at different scales. So the first one is just what you might think about when you think about biophilic design, is this visual connection with nature. We're very visual creatures, and views of nature and living systems is very soothing and relaxing to us. So that might be in a building, having actual greenery, having a green wall, having framed views through windows of creating that visual connection. The non-visual connection with nature is a little trickier and a little bit harder to photograph. So when I look for examples of non-visual connection to nature, you can imagine I'm not finding, exactly what I'm looking for, but it's that haptic stimuli that engenders this deliberate and positive reference to nature. So it can be through things that are also visual, like wood, like texture, like material, like smell, like things that change over time, like a view of a tree that changes with the seasons. Non-rhythmic sensory stimuli is another pattern of biophilic design, and it's also hard to photograph, but when you think about it, I think we've all appreciated this aspect of nature in the natural world, which is something that is not able to be predicted precisely. So maybe you're sitting outside having a picnic and a kind of butterfly comes past you and you think, oh, I love being out here. This is wonderful. No one designed that butterfly, right? But that experience kind of came to you as this kind of nature experience that is this kind of ephemeral connection with nature. So we can design spaces that might set up a situation like that to take place. There's a wide range of ways we can think about non-rhythmic sensory stimuli. It can be in the design of routes and passages and outdoor spaces, in variety in outdoor spaces and programming. Thermal and airflow variability. So something about contemporary buildings that maybe people find works against biophilic design is that we often have one temperature inside our space. So when you go into your classroom at university or into an office, it probably has a set point for comfort. So in nature, you have these subtle changes in air temperature and relative humidity. To address this thermal and airflow variability, it might be to have operable windows, might be to have a skylight, might be to think of ways that you can add variability as an option in the space. The presence of water, something I think that designers use not quite enough. I think clients and designers should be encouraged to have deliberate experiences with water, both the seeing of water, the hearing, touching, thinking of multisensory experiences. It's been proven to be so relaxing and therapeutic in all the different kinds of scales, even at the scale of a house here. Having a water feature can be really relaxing and also promote that sense of connecting with nature. A lot of my own research looks at lighting in buildings and how it's more than just enough light, right? It's the quality of light and how it changes over time. So this biophilic pattern is about changing dynamic and diffuse light in buildings. So thinking about how we appreciate spaces that have that variety and variability. Connection with natural systems and awareness of natural processes. That could be things like spaces that allow us to understand changing seasons, in this case, being able to understand food systems in the area, even growing and eating food in one building. Biomorphic forms and patterns. This can be something like textures, patterns, fractals, these kinds of strategies we use in the form of our buildings. So whether we're always using rectilinear shapes or whether we're incorporating biomorphic forms and patterns, material connection with nature. This is something that in Canada, we're seeing a lot more wood projects because people really like that warm, natural connection with nature. And for other reasons as well, that link to environmental and social considerations. Complexity and order, connecting to nature's natural spatial hierarchies, that richness that we encounter in nature, trying to bring a little bit of that into the built environment. So many ways to do that. Sometimes incorporating an existing building can be a way of creating a really interesting spatial hierarchy. Prospect and refuge are an interesting way of thinking about how we feel safe and secure and inspired in our spaces. So prospect is this idea in buildings where we like to be able to get up high and have a privileged view outwards, whether that's a balcony on a tall building or a viewing deck, having this privileged view over a distance. Here, the area for eating is raised up so they can see out over the forest. And then combining that with refuge, which is where you are able to sit back from a protected position and have that prospect. So we all probably intuitively do that in spaces. We would kind of go up to that curved wall and put our back to it and look out over the space. Mystery, I think, is really exciting, thinking about how our buildings can unfold as we move through them, rather than just a building that you just walk in and you see it all, you know what's going on, very legible. But how do you design something that entices people to move through that environment the way that we do in nature? Maybe it's not always having a direct view through something, but rather, suggesting a route through. Risk and peril. The last pattern is thinking about how sometimes we like the excitement in a building or in an environment of something that's a little bit tricky to navigate, something that's an identifiable threat with a reliable safeguard. Like, for example, in this reference library, the glass elevator that goes up and down. You know you're safe. You're in an elevator, it's going to be fine. This view you get, you think, oh, this is great. So those are the 14 patterns of biophilic design. And I think thinking about biophilia, salutogenic design, how we can feel better and happier in spaces is a great way to enhance urban living by design. There's a lot more to talk about in terms of these concepts, but those are the slides I thought I would share with you on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. That was very insightful. Next, we'll have our second panelist, Dr. David Roberts. He completed his PhD in geography at the University of Toronto, and he joined the Urban Studies program in 2013. Prior to this, he engaged in meaningful work at a shelter for homeless and refugee teenagers in Seattle. And that started his deep interest in urban issues and urban life. His commitment to create livable and equitable urban future is evident in his role as a professor and citizen of the university and the city of Toronto, most notably through his research, community engagement, and teaching practices. Welcome, David, and here you go.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, so just one second. Okay. I also threw a workbook in the chat. Some of my slides come from the workbook, and they may be difficult to read, so you have a PDF version as well. What I'm going to talk about today in 5 minutes is, or in 10 minutes, is to give you two examples of how I work to democratize design. So basically how I can bring in new people into the design process. One is focused on research, where me and my team use a co-design process to invite service users into the process of reimagining the services that they have used. And the second is pedagogical. So a design studio that I run that matches multidisciplinary teams of undergraduate students with communities who have specific needs that they are looking to have some consulting on. So basically the first project is specifically on the research, and the context is that there are approximately 200 independent refugee youth that come to Canada on an annual basis to settle into our cities. And these youth come to Canada as refugees, but without a family. And that distinguishes them from the kind of typical refugees that we see that are either adults or come with families. As a consequence, they encounter services that are not fully designed for them. They may end up, at least in terms of housing, in shelters that are designed for domestic homeless youth, or they end up in family shelters for refugees, neither of which fully meets their needs or fully fits with the kind of their life journey. So what we've been doing over the course of the last 3 years is to work with young adults who came to Canada as youth, and to plot their experiences with navigating what we're calling the service landscape, and document that, and then to work with youth and service providers to imagine what might be different or what might be next steps. I should say here that I'm working closely with some colleagues at a design firm called A Field that does this type of human-centered co-design on a regular basis in a variety of settings. So check them out if you're interested. It's afield.ca. So this is the context. In 2019, we got funding for a 3-year study. It's been extended a bit because of the pandemic, but essentially what we were interested in is how do these independent refugee youth, who are often rendered invisible, both navigate the service landscape, but also could be essential voices in imagining something different or something new. And so in terms of thinking through how they navigate and how their navigational process might be different from the way in which it's described in various different government documents or other types of imaginations, one is really to think about a housing journey. And the Toronto Housing Mortgage Corporation has a pretty linear approach to thinking through a housing journey, which starts with homelessness or being unhoused up into market ownership. And while it may not be their intention, it's presented as if these are steps along a journey that one just naturally flows. In our first design workshop that we did with the young adults, we were interested in sort of how this journey actually takes place for some. And in the linear map that you can see below, you can see that people move along a linear path, but others bounce back and forth from informal emergency housing, whether that be a homeless shelter or somebody's couch, to market-based and back and forth. Others have different journeys. So this process of finding market rate home housing is not one that is a linear process. So it disrupts that kind of vision. And we're also interested in sort of the determinants of what allows for independent refugee youth to settle and to find predictable, affordable housing. So here it just captures some of those determinants, some of the challenges that the youth face, and mixes sort of the kind of academic language about affordable housing or the design language of affordable housing with some quotes and other sorts of testimonials of the youth. So really bringing in voices of those who are service users into debate or into dialogue with how these processes are described. This slide captures the various different types of shelter services that are available in the Greater Toronto Area, and really tries to think through and analyze the ways in which they're connected to other services. So here we're trying to combine both the physical form of the houses, which you can see at the bottom of this chart, along with the types of services that they provide, which is the kind of middle column. And then ultimately where we're at this moment is we've done 3 design workshops with youth and with service providers. And now we're challenging a handful of designers to come up with an intervention based on the booklet that I circulated in the chat, as well as some other background material and some prompts that are not yet in that booklet that we just received from our last design workshop. But really to think about how can we use these insights, these voices, these perspectives of a hidden service user population to reimagine improvements to the service landscape. And that those reimagination can look at both the built form as well as connective tissue, how people get information. So an app, for example, or other ways in which service delivery takes place. So that's where we're at. This summer, we're having 3 design workshops with designers, and then we'll have another round of workshops with the independent refugee youth to provide us feedback and refinement of those projects. So the second is specifically about a course that I'm the director of. It's called the Multidisciplinary Urban Capstone course. It's a mouthful, so we just use MUCP. And the course is a partnership between Urban Studies, which is a small undergraduate program at the University of Toronto, and the School of Cities, which is a research think tank at the university. You can find more information on that link. Laura has my slides, so she can share them afterwards if you need the links. Sorry, I went backwards. And what makes this course unique at least at the University of Toronto is that we intentionally bring students from across disciplines throughout the university and put them in multidisciplinary teams. So every team will have a mix of students who have different training and background. We assemble teams of 3 to 5, and then we partner them with a need that a community agency or community organization has identified as a key need that they would like some consulting on. So students have the opportunity to work across disciplines, which is really important and stimulates design thinking in a lot of interesting ways. They're working on a real life challenge. And the idea is that the team over the course of the year prototypes an intervention on that challenge. The projects are chosen, or the needs are chosen based on their complexity, but also on the possibility of various different design interventions. And then students work over the course of the year to prototype that and then share that with both their community partners, but also the larger university and city community. I specifically center a design justice framework in that many of our projects, many of the needs that are identified are with populations that are either vulnerable or historically marginalized from the university, and so or from the design process. So we work to make sure that design justice is centered there, and then really thinking through who is part of this design process. So these are the projects that we have this year. I'm not going to go through them because of time, but they give you a sense of the various different partners that we have, as well as the different. Sorry, my computer's doing really strange things right now. The different projects that we have and the different partners that we have. The list is all on the link that was on the previous slide. And then, interestingly enough, this year, Pune Municipal Corporation has asked to partner with us. So it gives us an opportunity to take our show on the road in some ways, where we'll have teams of students in Mumbai working on a couple of projects in Pune, who will be partnered with the teams in Toronto. And then we'll spend a week there in November to get some on the ground experience. But basically doing the same thing, but with a international team. So I'll leave it there and hopefully get a sense of the type of design work that I do.
Thank you so much for your presentation, David. Now we have our third panelist, Clemence Martin Beaumont. She is an experienced designer, recognizes the evolving complexity of human-environment relations and the need for comprehensive design solutions. With a background in industrial design and specialization in service and experience design, she currently works at Connected Places Catapult. Clemence's interdisciplinary approach and international training in Paris and London enable her to offer innovative and user-centered experiences. She embraces the diversity of projects and people, making her a valuable asset in creating optimized and innovative global user experiences. Welcome, Clemence.
Thank you. So I'll share my screen as well. Let me just. I'll just make it full screen. Can you see my screen? Perfect. So yeah, nice to meet you all. So as you said, the right time, I'm a service designer working at Connected Places Catapult, and we are looking specifically in designing approaches to engage stakeholders and communities in different ways in our projects, and with a focus on testing as well. So I would like to present to you today the use case that we have in a case study of the Homes for Healthy Aging program that we've been running since 2021, and that just finished this year. These test bed program what has as an aim, I would say, and objective to contribute towards the UK government's goal to support older adults to live at home healthily for 5 years longer. It's a program that has been funded by Innovate UK, our main funder, and the objective was to create test beds in 5 locations in the UK with location partners or local consortiums, and to test and demonstrate innovative approaches and solutions coming from different UK-based and international solution providers, and also to really focus our efforts on delivering replicable and impactful solutions through this testbed approach. So maybe to clarify things before going into the detail, maybe you're not all familiar with this term of testbeds. And so at Catapult, the way we define it is that it's an environment and an ecosystem of stakeholders offering innovators access to user groups and real-world contexts so they can actually test, develop, and showcase their products and ideas without the usual risk. So it's really about learning and de-risking innovation by testing in real-life settings. So actually, testbed can be facilitated in more or less controlled environments. So I would say more or less real life settings. And here are like some examples of what a testbed can be and actually has been as well in the Homes for Healthy Aging program. So we could be, for instance, on the left side, recruiting participants to use and test new solutions in their homes. We could be looking at utilizing an area of public realm to trial solutions, for instance, to improve active travel, or using a community, like establishing a community hub, like in an empty shop front to co-create solutions and test new services with the community here in place, or finally equipping carers with new technologies or services to test how well they support their work, but also the well-being of people being cared for. So these are more like, what is a test bed actually? So in this program, we initially went through like a big initial research, and I won't go through all of these, but we highlighted key themes that we think we would like to focus on or would be interesting to focus on. And in this project, it's just good to understand as well that we made really a point to consider the home in its broadest sense, so considering the home as a house, a flat, but also the building estate around, and around again the neighborhood and the community, because it's coming from as well testimonies from our initial research with users, where we were asking them about the meaning of independence and home for them. So we organized these things as you can see it here. So in the center, you will have the focus more potentially on the physical health and mental health of older adults. Then obviously all the challenges related to housing, the actual home and the neighborhood they live in as well. Then around that, we wanted to look as well at the community and social environment of the individuals. And finally, look at how care provision could be delivered and is delivered to support older adults aging in their home and in their place in their neighborhood as well. So these were like key themes that were we suggested to our potential partners, and we were actually looking at running open call and expression of interest for local authorities and universities to apply to be part of the program and to become a testing partner and a location and testing partner. So across the 2 years, we had and we selected 5 different locations across the UK. You can see here the different partners we've been partnering with. And so each of them applied with a specific challenge, which were a bit more focused and more relevant to their place and to their aging population. So in Sunderland, we looked at addressing cold and damp housing condition. In Northern Ireland, at reducing social isolation and loneliness. In Leeds, at improving health and well-being through social connectedness. In Essex, we were looking at improving efficiencies in care provision, so more on like the professional care side. Whereas in Brighton and Hove, we were looking at building resilience in unpaid carers who are rather family members, relatives, caring for an older person. So these were the 5 locations of the 5 test beds, environments, and test bed projects. And so for this program, we refined and developed our real world testing framework, which you can see here. I won't go through all of that in detail, but it gives you an idea of what the steps we went through with each of the test bed partners. And I'll just explain you that we really structured that in 3 different steps. So the first one being the innovation foundation, really key to get the test bed established and potentially well running. So we were looking at doing, again, like challenge research, challenge definition locally in each place, making sure we had a very good understanding, and the partners as well, of the actual challenges experienced by end users, by stakeholders as well, who were the stakeholders involved around their challenge as well, and what would be good problems potentially to address later on in the test bed as well. And we also looked with the partners at really shaping the test bed for them. And so looking, depending on their capacity, local capacity, so what community, who are the people they could connect with in terms of offering them the opportunity to test solutions, but also what would be the environment for testing as well, in terms of access to homes, access to places, to public spaces, to community centers, and finally, who could be the stakeholders locally who could support these approaches as well. So really defining in each location how the testbed would work. Then we move to the solution part, where we could be either designing or picking a solution. In our case, we were picking solution as we wanted to involve startups and small and medium enterprises, which we call SMEs. And so we ran open calls once we had defined our challenge. So we ran open calls to offer this opportunity of testing to the solution providers and to ask if they would have solutions fitted for the challenge as well, so potentially able to impact the challenge. So here we were selecting small enterprises and businesses. And then the main step, obviously, is the test and learn one, where we did a lot of support in terms of deployments for the location partner, the solution suppliers, to make sure they could work well together, refine the trial plan and their deployment plan as well, making sure it was valuable, that they would learn for it, that it was safe for end users as well, and like robust, and that they would have like a good monitoring and evaluation plan as well in parallel, as the next step is actually the testing and monitoring of the solution. So we had, and I'll give you examples, solutions tested for either few days, a few weeks, few months, but depending on the insights they wanted to gather and the local capacity as well. And obviously there were like monitoring results and insights on this at the same time. And finally, we supported the solution suppliers in actually analyzing the results and measuring the impact of the solution on the given challenge. So this is a framework that we used. And so overall, we managed to engage with 27 SMEs, so small and medium enterprises, across the 5 test beds, and to engage with 290 participants, covering all the activities and engagement activities that we had, from like questionnaires, surveys, focus groups, interviews, but also actual testing trials in real life settings, and also showcases. So recruitment was a challenge, but in the end, like the location partners were quite successful in finally finding the good profiles of participants to engage with. And so I'd like to just give you some examples of the interventions that happen in this program. Obviously, as I said, we had 27 businesses and solution providers. But here are just a selection of 3 that might be a bit more related to our topic today, and that give you a bit more of an idea of the diversity of interventions that we had. So the first one is Treasured Time. So they developed a tool which enable to gather key information around an older adult who's receiving care potentially about their identity, their pattern and habits of living. But one of the feature is this reminiscence gallery, the idea being like to offer to the individual the capacity to reminisce of the past and to really stay connected to their identity as well. And what's interesting is that these business, they've been doing a first usability testing in the Northern Ireland test bed. When speaking in a focus group session and with people, they discovered that actually people were interested to use this function in a more community setting and actually to be reminiscing together about the past, and actually that would bring a lot of like meaningfulness in terms of social connectedness and bringing something really concrete and attached to their local place as well. And so they use these ideas to pivot a bit and change their ways of delivering their tool to actually make it more of a community one to start with. And this is what they tested in the Leeds testbed, where they applied for the second time, where they actually trialed these community setting, bringing people together in community centers, so in a more public realm, to reminisce together and connect together around this challenge of social connectedness. That was interesting to see the journey of this business and how engaging with users enabled them to iterate and improve their solution. The second example is Center Robotics. So they've developed these Center vehicle, which is a much more compact, but also less stereotyped vehicle for moving that can get ups and down, and that which is great for people a bit adverse to use wheelchair potentially. And so here, what's interesting is that the product was ready and running, ready and working, but they wanted to co-design the service behind. So they did like user research and co-design workshops in Leeds with users to explore different service models and potentially rental models, where people would be able to rent these vehicles, but in different settings. So they were looking at how the service model would be different in a shopping center, or in social housing as well. And finally, the last example I wanted to share with you was Urban Tide. So they have a more database visualization tool where they can predict potential fuel poverty situations in an urban setting, like in a geographic area. So they set that up for the Sunderland test beds and for the Sunderland city. And what was interesting here is that they wanted to test a specific use case with social prescribers. So giving this tool to social prescribers to actually start off discussions with the people they were visiting and trying to see if they could identify cold and damp housing conditions and potentially fuel poverty situations as well, and then signpost them to the right services. So what was interesting here is that obviously that would eventually benefit older adults, but we were actually mainly engaging with social prescribers, and they were like the intermediary to reach and to benefit older adults in the end. But so we were trialing this tool in the end with 2 profiles at a time. So that gives you a bit more of an idea of what trials were conducted. And for instance, this last one lasted around 2 months. And so just to share a bit more of the successes, challenges, I would say learning from this program as well. So this approach of co-design and testing in real life settings can be really valuable. So here is just one example on the Homes for Healthy Aging program, but we're doing that in other contexts as well. But in any case, for this program, what was interesting is that obviously one of the success was to actually involve end users and really actively engage with them in the design and development stages, because obviously first for the communities, it's really important to feel heard by potentially their local authorities, by the people able potentially to impact the challenge and really feel involved in the process. It has a great value for businesses because it's quite rare for them to access potential end users and potential clients. For location partners as well, it was great for them to deploy an inclusive research approach around the challenges they had as well locally, and to see a bit in their community who would be interested to be part of that. Obviously, testing solutions in real life, because you can never anticipate everything, and you can really discover more by trialing solution in real life settings and real life scenarios and real people. We had, what was quite interesting is that there is like a specific care on risk management to engage with potentially vulnerable audience. Because we made sure that every business had made like a risk assessment, making sure the testing activities were safe and feasible for the people testing, and not likely to bring too much anxiety. We delivered trainings and tools as well on how to engage with people, potentially vulnerable as well, a lot of design methodologies actually, and ethnographic research. We provided, and the location partners provided safeguarding training as well. And we had specific focus on ethics, data management, consent and privacy. So all of that very important to consider in these intervention. And another thing is that obviously that was, I would say a pros and cons, but that was a fast-paced project for each of the location. We had about a year to establish everything, find businesses, test, analyze all of that. So it can feel long, but actually when you actually have to do that in real life setting with real people, recruiting people, that was quite fast paced. But in the end, it was interesting as well that it showed all the partners how they were capable of delivering such a project in a short amount of time and act on their challenge, but also how testing could be valuable to learn things quickly and pivot on your solution quite quickly, even though you can always test for longer, but you can still gather valuable learnings quite quickly. The challenges and really honest challenges, I would say, was about recruiting end users, because it's one thing to aim to involve them, then it can be quite demanding for them as well. And specific profiles, some profiles were difficult to find and recruit, such as people around the challenge of isolation and loneliness, obviously, but also unpaid carer who are already struggling with time, and that was quite a lot of ask on them to do an additional trial on that. So definitely lessons learned on like the time requested, the different ways to reach out to end users and how we can adapt that depending on their profiles, the channel of communications, all of that. But very interesting to see in the end that we managed to engage with almost 300 participants. Capacity and resourcing time for partners. As I said, we were mostly working with councils and universities. And so sometimes they have quite limited capacity in terms of resourcing, and the project was quite demanding. So yeah, we had to support them a lot on these and to see what was the most feasible for them. And finally, a kind of fine balance for us at Catapult to find between leading the project and upskilling partners as well, because obviously the goal was also to inspire all these businesses, these local authorities, universities, to actually run similar approaches again, and to also be able to get upskilled on these kind of methodologies. So I think that's a bit of a short summary for today, and happy to take any questions following this.
Thank you so much. Now we're gonna enter a time of moderated discussion. My colleague Marina will be facilitating that. If you have any questions, leave them in Q&A, and we'll find time to get through all the questions, hopefully. Yeah, Marina.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. That was really inspiring, and I think a lot of the conversations you're bringing to us are things that we're exploring within the MA in a way or another. And I think the first thing that kind of really kind of inspired me was to see this shift on how we are measuring things, you know. So Terry said, you know, the shift that from quantifying the building kind of performance to seeing how people feel about that space. And I think that also comes when Clémence says about, you know, testing, and then the work is based on kind of trial and error and iteration, which is something that is an aspect of academia. So when we are students, we are kind of encouraged to fail in a way, but then when we go to work in the industry, this seems a bit like, oh, things need to achieve certain standards or have something a bit more prescribed. So it will be interesting to see like how you see that, and you as well, like David, when when you're bringing this collaboration between academia and the industry, how do you go on about measuring success, or how much of failure is actually allowed in your practice? So I don't know if all three of you could give like a quick, just share some thoughts on that, would be appreciated. Yeah. And I don't know, anyone can go first.
I can hop in. So yeah, I mean, I think projects, we always have these ideas of what the project outcome will be at this onset, and that's not always the case for a variety of reasons. I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us to be nimble, and I think that's a good good advice, or good sort of perspective for these types of projects as well. The way that I frame it with the students that I work with is, and also kind of our industry partners, is that these projects are iterative, right? So failure isn't a final outcome. It's a bump in the road, right? So it may mean that we need to rethink our approach or our criteria for success to meet the realities of what we're understanding or newly understanding them to be. But it doesn't necessarily doom a project, right? It just means that we have other work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe building on David, your comment about what COVID might have taught us, if anything. I think thinking about how we work and how we live and how we use cities now, I think there's more of a focus on spaces worth visiting. What, for example, a university environment, what brings you to campus? It's got to be pretty great to get you out of your pajamas on a Zoom call, right? Like, so thinking, how do we make spaces that people actually want to go to campus? Because it feels productive and collaborative, and it makes you feel good. So I think anything that we can value, we can measure. It's just we're going to use different tools. So I noticed a couple of questions in the chat talking about like measurement and value of different things. So I think if we can find a way to figure out what success looks like, what are our success criteria, what is our goal, and we can kind of work backwards from that and think, how can we measure that or evaluate that? I think it's going to lead to meeting the design intent for designers, which I think is a goal.
Thank you. Yeah, Clemence, how was it for you in your experience, like approaching this from a very test-based kind of experience?
Well,
how did the stakeholders kind of engage?
I think that's interesting in a testing context as well, because obviously the opportunity is actually to just offer the capacity to test and trial a solution, but we were really trying to share that with partners, location partners and businesses, that like, you'll test and maybe things won't work. That's the point of testing at this stage as well. But it's not really a failure, it's more like a learning on your way. So as you say, it's a bump in the road. I quite like this image as well. It's more like saying, okay, I was thinking that people would be interested in my solution, or I was thinking that in that context, they would use it that way. Actually, not at all, or they're not interested, they're not attracted to it. So trying to understand and go a bit deeper with design tools as well, with design methodology, in terms of understanding, okay, what else can we learn here, and how can we pivot? How can we be, actually, you're almost more creative with constraints as well. So that was interesting. Also, saying that was a bit of work with the local councils, potentially, with whom we were working with, because we had to share that with them, like, okay, we'll select potentially 5 to 10 businesses with you to work with you. Just be aware that these are tests. So we need to be confident that we made everything possible to design a robust trial plan. And we were asking each business to start with the research objectives. So as you say, what success would look like, or what are you trying to actually learn here that you don't know yet? So trying to focus where they had less evidence, because the point of doing a test was to actually learn, and make sure that the learning be beneficial both for the business itself, but the location partners on their challenge as well. So even though some parts of the trials sometimes were not, I would say, validated, or they were not successful, it was about what did we learn here, and what does it, maybe we learn more about people's needs, maybe we learn more about their context, about the feasibility of implementation, the funding behind. But so, yeah, it's always learning and progressing, I would say. So it's just part of the design process in itself.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, all of your answers, because for me, what kind of the feeling I get is that we as designers are kind of becoming in a position that we're actually very open to be wrong and to shift our mindset, or to shift our practice, so we can get better, other than coming from this very expert kind of view, or I know it all, I know how things can be done. And I think that maybe goes alongside this willingness to collaborate and to bring people into the conversation, which I think leads me to kind of a second question on how actually this collaboration comes about. So I think there is the collaboration with the users, and from the experience I'm having now, it's sometimes very tricky to get people to actually engage with the project, like ask people to spend time or to share their stories is not always easy. And then at the same time, there's this engagement with stakeholders, so with other, partners, or the council, or the companies that are working together, or even other industries, so other professionals that might come and help develop the project. So I would like to hear a little bit more on how you make this how do you foster these collaborations? And David, when you mentioned about the justice design framework, how do you go and make sure that all the stakeholders are actually aligned and aware that this is kind of, a value that you want to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of the way that I approach it, is really just deep listening to community members about what their needs are. So we always start our projects, whether they're research projects or these course-based projects, with community-centered needs, right? So I come up with the questions, or even the challenges, but rather spend time with community members, with community organizations, with city builders who are doing that work, to understand the kind of challenges that they're facing, and then build projects around that. It takes time, it takes relationships, it takes a lot of energy, and it also just takes a different positionality than a lot of sort of traditional designers might have, in that I don't see myself as necessarily I don't see myself at all as containing the kind of knowledge that is needed for the design interventions, design solutions, but rather I'm there to facilitate a process. So I think it's just recentering who's at the at the core of coming up with the ideas and the solutions and even kind of the needs, and then and designing around that. But yeah, it's definitely difficult. I mean, I think one of the challenges that we faced with the research project I presented was finding this hidden population. There's there's lots of reasons why an unaccompanied refugee claimant or potential refugee claimant might not want to participate in a research study. There's potential legal challenges that they might face by outing themselves as an unaccompanied minor in Canada. There's also they have just trying to live their life and navigate a really complex system. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not a perfect. My approach is not perfect in that finding users can still be a real challenge, but I think starting with what community needs are and really building projects and building processes around those helps align the work that I do with the kind of needs and desires of the community.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else would like to chip in.
Yeah, I guess maybe how to foster collaboration with users. It's so in our case, specifically in this program, as I said, recruitment was a challenge, like sometimes finding the right person, communicating well to really make sure that they understand what we were expecting from them, what the project was about, was the benefit for them as well. So we really encouraged the location partners to put like a recruitment strategy in place, and to actually go through trusted partners as well. I would say that often it went like a bit, that was quicker and easier when you had like, trusted partners onboarded. So for instance, in Northern Ireland, one of the organization in the consortium was Age NI, so the equivalent of Age UK in Northern Ireland, and who are like a key charity in the UK for around like engaging with older adults communities and having huge knowledge on their challenges, their profiles, their situation, and often they're like engaging with them in kind of community center settings, activities they're offering. They have many offer in terms of information activities as well for older adults. So it worked really well when you actually we were doing like face-to-face recruitment. They were actually actively recruiting like in the centers, explaining, answering questions, being available as well to answer questions, and always obviously make quite clear that people can withdraw at any time. There is no like too much commitment, and obviously providing vouchers as well, incentives to thank them for their time, because that was time consuming in a way for them to be testing a solution in their home or in their context as well. So that these were like maybe few considerations on the top of my mind, and also making sure that we had all the documentation in place in terms of we asked all businesses doing a trial to provide a one-pager that we were reviewing with them, like very clear, not like who are you, what is your solution, what is your trial project, basically what people are supposed to do and what they will get at the end as well. And we manage as well consent forms, making sure in terms of data management, all of that everything was aligned with GDPR and like ethical in terms of privacy as well. So really manage to share this information in a very accessible way as well, be available to answer questions, and having different communication challenge if possible in this context of working with older adults at least.
Thank you. Yeah. And Terry, listening to your talk, I was very curious to know like who you work with other than architects, like who else is involved on this creation of these buildings? And
I have a current project in two different long-term care homes, looking at how biophilic design can be implemented in long-term care. Kind of building on the comments just made about how to include more people in the conversation and get feedback from users. it's been quite difficult being able to actually talk to people with dementia in long-term care home. It's a different kind of user and a different kind of context, and different kind of permissions and ethical approvals are required. So I've really kind of figured out why a lot of the research in this area actually surveys staff, because that's totally different. And so it kind of, over the last 3 years, I've sort of realized why the research in the area sort of is located and focused where it is, because it's actually quite difficult to long-term care because of COVID and other reasons. Is in the context that I'm in Canada. Actually, it varies province by province as well. It's very tricky to actually get to the users, to people, and ask them, are you comfortable in your space? What spaces do you use? How do you use them? Why? To really push forward with what I think is a really important focus, which is improving long-term care for the elderly in different environments, including long-term care, which is this sort of 24/7 care environment. So I don't have a great answer for how to bring in everybody. I'm working on trying to include more people in that conversation. But I think that's an environment. I think I have current projects relating to apartment living and balconies, and how we design balconies and how that works, looking at industry collaborators and resident groups. And then in long-term care design, which is still an environment for living, but it's also a workplace. So it's got this kind of hybrid program type, thinking about how people live, but also how people work in a home environment. So those are the kinds of areas where I'm applying these ideas about biophilic design and trying to measure how people respond to environments kind of before or as existing, and then with some kind of biophilic intervention. So I think that those are two areas that seem quite important to focus on, although there are many. What about learning environments? What about spaces where we work? So I think we could apply quality over quantity of environments to all of our spaces at multiple scales. So I'm not sure that really answered your question, but those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about in my work.
Yeah, no, I think what I'm hearing is that, there is this challenge on engaging the end user, but it feels that if we put ourselves in a position of also being available to share, it's easier to get the sharing flag and create a dialogue. It seems to be kind of the key, but at least from the conversation that I'm hearing. And then just kind of at the back of what you're saying, Harry, I wondered if service design actually, it's something that is part of, how is the connection between architecture and service design for you, or is that not something that is happening yet? So just wondering if service design is something that comes in when you're working, for example, with the homes for the elderly or in educational settings, if there's a dialogue between the service and...
I think there could be more, and I think that's a direction that designers should engage with more in the design of long-term care. I think currently it's fairly fractured in terms of how the different people working on a project work together for various reasons. Maybe not all good reasons either. Maybe, reasons that can change just through people creating relationships and collaborations, and a champion on the project that really wants everyone to work together. So I think it's an area that could really benefit from listening to people's needs, thinking about what services we provide and how they're used and where to focus our efforts. So in my work, I see that as a direction of connecting more to the different aspects of, for example, in long-term care, of care and services and community supports and collaborations. I think those all need to work really together.
How is it for you, David and Clemence? Because for you, it feels like both projects that you presented, it's very connected. The built environment and the service delivery, they are kind of part of the same thing. You know, they cannot have it without the other. So I'm wondering if that's something new or if that's something that you've been exploring for a while, and how do you see this connection, kind of the benefits or the challenge of it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's something that I've been doing both as a social worker before coming to grad school, and then also as an academic and designer. That connection is pretty clear. But what I do know is I don't have architectural training or an architectural background. So I work pretty closely in collaboration with architectural students and architects to do this work. And it takes a lot of, there are challenges built into that, right? So part of it is different ways of knowing, different ways of communicating, and different ways of seeing the world that whenever you're in these cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary partnerships, you have to work on, right? To make sure that everybody's on the same page. My architecture students that I work with are great designers in terms of drawing, in terms of rendering spaces, in terms of capturing both what is and what's possible. But some of their training doesn't always include context, right? So that who is the user of this space? How is it related to various different services that might be provided out of these beautiful spaces? So really trying to bridge that, which I tend to focus on, that user experience or kind of the clients or the community that's going to be in and occupying these spaces, and have competing sort of visions and competing uses of those spaces. How do we translate that into the design practices of architects? It's not always clear, but I think it's that in the same way that I think transparency and dialogue are really important when you're working with community. It's also essential when you're working across fairly siloed, as Terry put it, ways of knowing or ways of approaching a design challenge, right? So the more that we can have those conversations about making sure that we're designing beautiful, useful spaces that are also human-centric and designed for particular services, just enhances, I think, both sides. But it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
Yes, I wouldn't say neither that it's so obvious yet, or so easy yet. Like for us, we definitely see the connection that maybe as professionals. But once again, I think just if I go back to the example I gave you of the test bed program, like having these testing approaches, one approach of service design, we never really named these as service design. People are not really like familiar with that, but I think they definitely, through the engagement through these programs, they definitely saw the point of it and the value of it, and the value of bringing all these stakeholders in this very tangible and concrete approach around the table to potentially impact how innovation in housing, in neighborhoods, in care in this case as well. But yeah, it's not I think there's a lot to do still, as you say, to really foster a dialogue, to show the benefits of crossing these approaches. And I know it's something that we discuss quite a lot at Connected Places Catapult with our colleague urbanists as well, how we could innovate in the urban processes, crossing with all of these with service design approaches as well, and making sure there is these experience and service consideration in what the place can provide. But yes, I wouldn't say it's easy yet. And for instance, we were quite pleased to see some of the businesses coming with these intention of co-designing services, but that was not most of them, and some of them were coming with a very ready to deploy solution, and that was it. So less of a service design approach, but so we're here, I guess, to advocate for that as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I think quite a few of us from this cohort comes from a background in either architecture, industrial design, product design. And yeah, we see that, you know, there is this desire to shift into more engaging with people, working with people, and thinking together how we can build these spaces. So I think just as a last kind of closing questions, we just wanted to hear from you, like, what is next? What is in the horizon? What would be your desire for projects in the future? Yeah, it can be either something that you already have, you know, that you can already see is already established, or maybe something that you would like to do if there was no limits on what you could do.
I think if I may start then, yeah, just for Connected Places Catapult. So following these program, we're looking now as in a more holistic way at healthy housing, healthy homes, housing and neighborhoods. So less healthy aging, but I would say multi-generational healthy environments as well. And one of the focus will be as well on the retrofits in housing as well, and the challenge of retrofit in the UK with like to make it more resilient socially and like in relation to the climate as well, more resilience. So that's one thing, and we'd like as well to still employ this kind of a demonstrating and testing approach in that case. And overall, in all of our projects, we really try to to facilitate the implementation of this kind of approach, test beds, or other types of testing approach. For instance, we have a test beds running right now in a train station at Bristol Temple Meads, testing solutions to improve the passenger experience in the station. We'll have one in an airport as well, so in different contexts as well. And I would say, finally, at a personal level, I'm still super interested in the mix between service design and urban planning as well. So definitely exploring how these methodologies and these ways of thinking can really cross and get I would say mixed together and benefit from each other.
Thank you, Clémence. Yeah, I think let's keep on exchanging kind of knowledge, and if you come across other talks or any knowledge around this kind of crossing between the disciplines, I think it would be really valuable for everyone here. Yeah, so thank you.
I can jump in. Yeah, so I think for me, increasingly, I'm interested in making sure that the work that I do as an academic is useful to the communities that I work with, and I think that's not always a focus of my colleagues. In that a lot of times we produce work for other professors or students to read, and not necessarily for communities to use. So with the project that I briefly touched on today, we're running right into the design intervention phase. So we'll have, by the end of the summer, various different prototypes, or at least more sophisticated ideas on how to improve the service landscape for unaccompanied refugee youth, independent refugee youth. And so I'm really interested in trying to figure out how to actually implement those. Like, what is it that I can do as a professor who has access to various different types of resources to facilitate the implementation of these interventions if the community wants that. And the same is true with the course, right? Like, every year we have 15 to 20 projects that students work on, and I'm interested in doing more to trace the life of those projects after that year of work that the students are doing, to make sure that our community partners have the resources and supports to actually be able to implement, if they want, some of the design interventions that the students are coming up with. So it's really bridging the kind of the studio experience, the research experience with making cities more livable and just in various different ways.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think that's what we are all going through at the moment with our major kind of projects and our research on kind of trying to understand how we can bring all this knowledge that we've been acquiring throughout the course and engage with the communities we want to engage with to solve like problems around. So yeah, I think we are all kind of considering how we can bridge this gap, or how our kind of more academic knowledge can be actually, made available, as you're saying, about democratizing, so yeah, thank you for that. And Terry, you.
Yeah, I would say a direction that I think is very promising is evaluating buildings and spaces, both for the building performance and also the people performance, like really engaging with people and finding out how they're using a space. I think that's a really promising way forward to reducing the energy and resources that our buildings consume. Sometimes there's a lot of waste and confusion over how something is designed to be used and how it's actually used. And I think the user is right. So we need to go back and use that as feedback into our design process as we renovate and retrofit and design new projects. So I think broadening the discussion of performance to include people, which obviously is what this group is focused on, is not a focus in building performance, right? The focus in building performance is building. So it's in this group, you're all thinking, yeah, it's the people, but I think we need to engage more with the building performance community, bring these ideas together and think about it in a more holistic way.
Thank you. Yeah. As we said, like we started the conversation about these measurements and how to evaluate. So yeah, it seems like an interesting challenge you have ahead. Yeah, so we are kind of 5 minutes before 2 o'clock, but I think unless anyone would like to share anything else or any questions from the public here that hasn't been answered, if anyone wants to just shout, that's the last call. Otherwise, maybe we can close the panel.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Peg.
There are 2 questions in the chat and one of them is mine. I just want to point that out.
Yeah. Oh, let me see the chat. Sorry, I had a Q&A here. Question for Terry. I'm wondering, in your view, how will biophilic application and interaction spaces will form in the future with the AI and VR and also changing technologies?
That's a big question. I think that's a great question. I'm not working in that space, but I think maybe that's something for this group to think about. How I think that's a great question. I don't have an answer. I think that there will be a relationship to relative nature, which is this idea, like in your mind, when you think about a nature space, if you're living in an urban place right now, you might think of something like a pocket park or a small space that you encounter on your daily adventures, whereas someone who's a farmer might think of nature as something very different. So we need to think about relative nature and how it works with our lives and what we experience. So I don't know, as we spend more time online, as we think about different technologies, good question. I don't have a great answer to that.
Yeah, and there's another question here about technology also, which is more about how organizations are using technology to engage stakeholders and end users.
Yeah, I can say a little bit about that in that. So our project started we got funding in 2019, but really started in sort of early days in 2020, and so pretty quickly things started shutting down around us, right? So we had imagined and mapped out a project that would have all of our design workshops would have been in person, but that was not possible. So we quickly moved to a combination of WhatsApp and Zoom to reach out to the various different stakeholders that we were working with, and stuck with it through the life of the project for a variety of reasons. One, it meant that we could reach people further afield than we would normally reach. Like, I think there's something nice about bringing people to a room at the university, but there's also something nice about not requiring people to travel to the center of the city if that's not where they are. And so some of our informants, some of our co-designers were actually people who came to Canada as young adults unaccompanied, but then didn't gain asylum, so had to go back home. And so we were able to really think through a broader variety of people, and then we adapted our tools to be able to work in the digital world. And I think that's, you know, there's some things that worked well and some things that didn't work as well as what we would normally have done, but I think it's just part of that adaptive process. And I would say for the class, we're engaging with a much wider set of community partners than we would have 3 or 4 years ago, because people are so much more comfortable using technology to meet and to do collaborative work, that we can have a partner in New York or a partner in Pune and find ways to collaborate. Whereas I would say in 2018, we just wouldn't have bothered to work on that problem, because we would have kept our partners to local agencies. So I think there's, you know, there's drawbacks to doing work through technology. I think we learn a lot from being in person and experiencing that human connection, but there's lots of ways in which the advancements in technology and just people's comfort with it has improved how we do our work as well.
Thank you.
In our case, I'd say, yeah, it's quite similar. If once again I take these examples of home healthy aging, I think what was interesting is that often in terms of profiles of people we were trying to recruit, we had like the business had to consider tech savviness and confidence in using technology as well to reaching out to these people. What I really liked in terms of learnings as well is like the misconception of older adults not being connected, which is absolutely a misconception as well, because is the case of some person in these generation and with different backgrounds and potentially access to technology, but it's definitely not the case of all. And we definitely had businesses running focus groups online, and interviews online as well, and reaching out to people only by email. So really being actually connected as well. So that's simply the fact of being connected in that case, but that was still interesting. I know that one business as well engaged with a group who were like testing their products through a WhatsApp group as well. So definitely, like, you can always try, and I think yeah, more and more people are actually we're accessing, as you said, maybe more people in that case than before COVID. Some of them, like specifically in among this population, often like councils provide trainings, workshops to get a bit more confident with all of that. So that was definitely one way to do things, and specifically in Northern Ireland and Sunderland, that was back in 2021. We were still like half in lockdown. So definitely did a lot of things remotely as well. So that helped. Another thought I had in another test bed in station innovation zone, for instance, in that case, there is also community engagement online. You have groups that you can do that as well online and exclusively online, which might be another way of like of doing that. There's existing platforms to do that. We are engaging with a company called Word Nerds and they're actually analyzing feedback of people in social media. Like, so in that case, on Bristol Temple that everything that passengers said on their experience in the station. So they're analyzing this feedback and then providing reports. So it's not, I would say, direct engagement in that case, but that gives a feeling a bit of a direction where we could go. And actual tech, I don't know exactly. I think, yeah, there's still massive value in being in person. This is why as well we're doing real life testing. And you don't get the same thing. You don't get the same potentially emotional engagement as well. But definitely it's worth considering the two and how they can be complementary.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a little bit what we were chatting at the very beginning about this meeting, like this panel itself on this balance about being online. It allows us to be together and bring people from all over the world, but actually it also misses the yeah, the connection and yeah, the niceness of being in person. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. This has been extremely insightful, and yeah, I hope we can keep the conversation going. We'll keep you informed, and everybody that has been listening, if you have more questions, or if you want to bring any other conversation, come and talk to us, and yeah, we'll make sure that we keep it going. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.